You, ladies and gentlemen, joined by Ian Crocker. Thank you so much for taking your time out, your busy schedule, to have a chat with me.
It's good to finally catch up, Darren. We've been talking about it for a while and we're finally here. Good to see you.
Yes. The first question is, what made you fall in love with commentary?
Well, I grew up in a village down in Dorset, a sleepy little village, and used to watch my local team, Weymouth, playing non-league football. And just used to listen to the radio and all the commentators of that era in England, which were like Peter Jones, Brian Butler, Peter Lorenzo, some great voices from way before your time, Darren, who I was hooked on as a boy. And I just thought, what a great job that would be. And fortunately got to live the dream eventually.
What was it like growing up down in Dorset?
Very quiet. And Weymouth actually were quite a good non-league team. We had some guys who played for us who went on to greater things like Graham Roberts at Rangers and Andy Townsend, Steve Claridge, a good few others as well. So they were always a good watch at that time. We were challenging for titles, and it was good to watch them. And then I started supporting West Ham because they had the same colours as Weymouth when I was only 9 at the time. It seemed like a good idea at the time. So that was the start of a life supporting West Ham as well as Weymouth.
What's been the best game you've done so far?
There's been so many, Darren, that it's hard to pick out one. I mean, I've done like nearly 60 Old Firm games, and obviously they've been tremendous. I've been lucky enough to do playoff finals in England in the Football League, or in Wales as it was actually at the Millennium Stadium. And they were great occasions as well. So there's so many to pick from. But I suppose if you're going to go through the whole list, I mean, I was lucky enough to do your team in that 6-6 draw at Motherwell 10 years ago. And that was, I mean, I suppose we will never see the like again. And if I'm being biased towards your team as well, the 2016 Scottish Cup final was special because nobody's been able to say that Hibs have won the Scottish Cup for 114 years. So it was it kind of happened on my shift, and obviously it was a huge day that for many of your Hibs fans.
And that 6-6 game was mad.
That's one word for it.
What inspires you?
I think, like I say, when you growing up, you hear various voices. For me, it was in England. I know Scotland had some magnificent football commentators as well, and there is something about the Scottish voice I love in generally, really. But in broadcasting, it's just so strong and powerful. But for me, it was listening to the likes of John Motson, Barry Davis, Brian Moore when I was growing up, and I thought, wow, what a great job that is. I wouldn't mind that one day. Not quite on their scale, but there were fewer commentators back in the day, whereas now there's a whole load more of us, thankfully. So there's more work to go around. But yeah, it was good listening to commentators when you were a kid because those guys were at the top of their game.
Who do you look up to?
In football,
just any.
I'll keep it to football. I look up to the wife to keep her on a good side. But in football, when I was watching West Ham, my favourite player was Billy Bonds, who unfortunately got to work with later in radio and television, and he was a terrific player. And quite a few players from that era. I think when you're a kid, it's the best time because you're a proper fan. And I was really lucky that I got a lot of the guys who were my heroes at the time were not only decent guys, I also got to work with many of them in the media. So not many people get that lucky. I would never dream of telling Billy Bonds that he was my hero, although he probably had a fair idea at the time, but he'd be totally embarrassed if I had said anything. But no, a lot of guys around who, as I say, I was fortunate enough to later work with.
Who were your footballing idols?
Yeah, Billy Bonds was probably one. I mean, the West Ham team that won the Scottish Cup, the FA Cup in 1975 and 1980 had some great players. Trevor Brooking, Alan Devonshire. Again, might be before your time, Darren, but they were terrific players. And when I go back to West Ham and commentate, some of them are there working behind the scenes as ambassadors. And it takes you back to being like a 15-year-old, which is how old I was when West Ham won the cup in 1980. You're almost too embarrassed to go up and speak to these guys. You revert to your boyhood, and I find that quite a good thing in many ways.
What team do you support?
Yeah, West Ham is the one, and it has been for many years now. I mean, as I say, when I was 9, I thought I was following Weymouth non-league. I thought I'd better follow a professional team as well, and West Ham had the same colours as Weymouth. It was that simple. Won the FA Cup twice whilst I was supporting them as a kid. Haven't won much since, but it just sticks with you. And unfortunately, I got to work there on the tannoy, on the public address, I did a bit of hospital radio, and then that was probably my first broadcasting kind of job. Doing the tannoy at West Ham. I was only in my early 20s and won a competition on local radio to do it. And obviously, that was a dream come true for me.
What Scottish team?
I don't have a Scottish team, although everybody thinks I do. Obviously, you get accused of bias, particularly in Glasgow. But I am neutral, as I say. I come from a sleepy little quiet village called Sutton Point in Dorset, and obviously there were no connections with Scottish football there. So I like to say that I support every team in Scotland because that's the way that I do look at it. They're all important. But, it's the kind of place where nobody really ever believes you on that, but I've kind of got used to it, so I just get on with it. But I am genuinely neutral, especially in Glasgow, honest.
What's the worst game you've done?
Well, there's been a few. A few years ago, going back quite a while now, we did 2 games in one day, and one of them was the Old Firm at 12 o'clock. And then we went up to Perth and did St Johnstone Kilmarnock at 6 o'clock. And I think it finished 0-0, as I remember, and it was pretty poor. But I think because it came off the back of like a mad, crazy Old Firm game as well, it felt particularly felt a particular stinker, that one. But there's been loads over the years, obviously. I remember doing an international game once, Norway, Azerbaijan, which finished 0-0. And absolutely nothing happened in the game. It was terrible. So that's one that always sticks in the mind. But there's certainly been a few, but thankfully more good ones than bad ones.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
Ooh, good question. Well, maybe touching 60 then, so getting old and past it. Hopefully still doing what I'm doing. I've been lucky enough to cover the Scottish on and off, but mostly on for 22 years now, amazingly. And as long as it continues, I'll be happy because I really enjoy the country, the people, the passion, and the football. So hopefully something similar, to what I'm doing now.
What does it feel like working for Sky Sports?
Yeah, really good. I've been very lucky. I first started working for them as a freelancer when I was doing local radio in London and Birmingham. That would have been about 1992 when I was doing the Bundesliga. We just used to sit in a cupboard in London and do the games off tube. It feels a very long time ago now, but it's been great. I mean, I was working for Capital Radio and went to the actual launch of the Sky Sports Premier League back in '92. There was a big press conference at Terry Venables Club in West London, and I'd been on a breakfast shift and didn't really fancy going, but it was a Monday and there was nobody else around, so I was kind of told to go along, and unfortunately was sat next to Vic Wakeling, who was the head of Sky Sports at the time. And after a couple of glasses of wine, I think even though I was a complete rookie by then, I was telling him that I'd be working for him one day. And unfortunately, it kind of happened. Just goes to show you've been at the right place at the right time. He offered some work. And yeah, it's been a long old stint. Sky have been long-time supporters of Scottish football as well. So it's great to continue doing what we do up here. I love it.
Can you remember your first game you ever done? What was it like?
I remember the very first game I commentated on was for Capital Radio back in the, could have been late 80s, early 90s. And obviously it was the first one. It was Barnet against Carlisle in a midweek match, probably in the bottom division. And I shared the commentary with Steve Wilson, who was also working for Capital Radio that day. He's now a Match of the Day commentator. And obviously it was, it was difficult. I found it really hard. There were 6 goals, funny enough. It was 4-2, but no, the first one is definitely one to get out of the way, like your first day in any job, really, or first experience of anything. And then in television, I did a couple of very early Premier League games back in the early 90s, which I probably wasn't ready for them, and kind of commentated on them in a radio style as well. So I grimace a bit when I see the occasional YouTube of those games. But yeah, everyone's got to start somewhere, but things hopefully have improved a little bit since those days.
Best player you've met?
Been a few. I would say that I really enjoyed. Well, obviously, there's a lot of West Ham guys, as I've already mentioned them, which I take for granted as being near the top of my list. But during commentary, I think I've really enjoyed watching Messi and Ronaldo, and we were fortunate enough to cover Celtic, of course, when they beat Barcelona, and at other times as well. When you're down in the tunnel waiting for the team sheets to come through, and you see Messi walking past you, it's a bit surreal. And I got to interview Cristiano Ronaldo when he was at Manchester United, actually, and he was to be fair, he was terrific, fantastic, and what a player as well. I'm not one to compare those two because I really enjoyed watching both of them over the years, and fantastic players.
Best ground you've commentated at?
Yeah, been a few. Old Trafford I really like because the gantry is fantastic, the atmosphere. Obviously, I'd be biased and say the old Upton Park, West Ham's ground, because I used to work there and loved going there. In Scotland, obviously Celtic and Rangers are good. Hibs and Hearts. Dundee United I really enjoy. Tannadice has got a great gantry. And one of the one of the best places for commentary was actually the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff when we did the playoff finals back in 2002 to 2006 when Wembley was being redeveloped. But the atmosphere there was fantastic. Sadly, there's not much football played there these days, but the way they built it, the fans are right on top of the action, and so are the commentators, and that was an experience and a half, especially with the high stakes of a playoff final as well. The atmospheres were tremendous.
What's the best cup final you've done?
In Scotland, I would say there are two that stand out over the years. The 2002 Old Firm Cup final, as a one-off occasion, was pretty special. Rangers winning it in stoppage time, Peter Lovenkrantz scoring. I do love a cup final, just a one-off experience. And then obviously in 2016, as we mentioned, your team winning it. I mean, an extraordinary game, and so many things that actually happened in that game get forgotten. But obviously the main moment was right at the end, and I was thinking, crikey, Hibs could actually do this. After 114 years, it could actually happen, and it did. And as a commentator, you just want to kind of call things right and get things right on the day, and hope you don't make a what of it. And thankfully, it seemed to come off on that day. And I know a lot of Hibs fans enjoyed it, and it's very humbling when you hear that they've got tattoos of your commentary or ringtones or whatever. It's great, but obviously for Hibs fans, it was such a long wait. Generations just haven't seen it, and I still get people talking about it to this day. I don't think they're going to stop for a good few years yet. So that was pretty special. So 2002 and 2016 for me, but also quite enjoyed when Inverness got to win the cup for the first time with your mate John Hughes in charge, and also St Johnstone as well for the first time. I like the smaller teams having their sort of day in the sun. It always fills me with joy a little bit.
What is it like doing a game at Hampden?
Yeah, when Hampden's full, it's a special place. It's different. Sometimes I wish it was a bit more like the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff because the fans are right there on the side of the pitch. But you can't argue with Hampden when it's full up. Sadly, it hasn't been very often for Scotland games. Recently, ironically, it would have been for Israel, the playoff that's coming up, but it doesn't look like it will be now. So when the Tartan Army is certainly, obviously for cup semi-finals and finals is brilliant, but when the Tartan Army are having a go with 50,000 in the stadium, there are a few sounds like that in football. So, but it's a stadium that needs to be full, and we just hope Scotland can sort themselves out and get to a major tournament. But it'd be a shame that Israel, the Tartan Army, would have had the place bouncing and jumping and rocking, and remains to be seen whether anybody will be allowed in or a few will be allowed in. But we'll see on that one.
What's the best goal you've witnessed?
That's a hard one because I've seen so many over the years. Crikey, it really is hard to pick one out commentating because there have been so many. I do love a good 30-yarder that rips into the top corner, or something that goes in off the underside of the bar or hits the side of the post. It's hard to actually think of one during the commentating career in particular because there's just been so many. But certainly when I was a boy, going back to me West Ham supporting youth, then Trevor Brooking scored one of the scrappiest goals ever in a cup final in 1980 to win the cup. But it was against Arsenal. Most of my mates in school at the time were Arsenal supporters, so that was pretty special, and that kind of still stands out for me, even though it was Brooking scoring with a header from a yard out, if that. But hey, it was special.
What was it like doing the 2016 Cup final?
Really, really special. And as I say, I remember when Hibs played Hearts in the first, well, not the first round, but the first round that they were in, third or fourth, whatever it would have been. And Hibs were 2-0 down, I think, with 10 minutes to go, and Paul Hanlon scored, and they scrambled the replay and won it, of course. And that was the start of the road to Hampden for them. And I remember saying after that Hearts Hibs game where they scored twice and forced a replay, I remember saying to Luke Shanley, our reporter, that's it. It's going to be Hibs' year. And admittedly, it was a bit of a throwaway remark, but so it turned out that way. And the final itself was just one of those games that were. I mean, Rangers played their part as well. Andy Halliday scored a screamer that gets forgotten as well. But yeah, it was an extraordinary game to do, and I know that it was a day that not just for the Hibs fans who were there and who are around now, but also for those many generations who never got to experience Hibs winning the Scottish Cup.
Obviously, what made you? I know a lot of commentators say if it's the last minute or whatever it was, and you just went, it's Henderson to deliver. What made you do that?
I don't know, Darren. You just a lot of the time you try and think about what you might say if something happened, and when I was younger, I kind of did that a bit. But then the goals are so random that they never happen the way you're going to expect them. So you end up trying to commentate on something in a way that it didn't happen. So you try and be a bit more off the cuff. Henderson to deliver just happened. What I like, if I'm being if I'm having a bit of an ego about that goal for a moment, is that just before that corner came in, I said, what a moment this is. And I didn't even remember saying it. In fact, it was Luke Shanley who told me about it a couple of days later, that even before the corner came in, he said, what a moment this is. And I honestly didn't remember saying it, but that kind of worked as well, obviously. And I must admit, with 20 minutes to go, or when they got that at 2-2, I did start thinking, I've got to come up with something here, because if Hibs win the Scottish Cup after 114 years, and it happens on your shift, you want it to be a decent line. So I was happy with standing on the brink of history, just as the players were standing on the actual stand in front of their fans when David Gray scored. So an awful lot came together for a commentator there, but it came together a bit more for the Hibs players and the fans, to be fair.
The role that you do for Sky Sports, how important is it?
Well, I don't know. Some would say not that important. You know, we're trying to, I always say we're trying to capture the moment, as we hopefully did when Hibs won the Scottish Cup. And you come up with a few lines here and there, but another commentator I know always says, oh, it's just about shouting out names, which essentially is what we're doing. And sometimes less is more, which is what my old boss at Sky always used to say. Sometimes you don't have to speak. For example, when the Hibs fans were singing Sunshine on Leaf after winning the cup, there was no point speaking, just let them take it away, which is what we did. And it was a great bit of telly. And like the really big games, I don't say anything when the teams come out the tunnel because there's no need. You could just leave it for the fans when the fans were there. And their noise, to me, brings those teams out and just sends a bit of a shiver down the spine, whichever game really. Obviously in the biggies like the Edinburgh Derbies or Old Firm's Dundee Derby, which I quite like as well. You just leave it to the passion of the fans. So it's ironic that you can actually do a lot of your best work when you're not talking because the atmosphere just is sometimes more important. Well, fairly often more important. But, you know, yeah, some people will say we talk too much. I probably still do. But, you know, it just goes to show that sometimes you can actually be quiet. And Barry Davis used to leave huge pauses when he was commentating, and it just worked. It was a different way of doing it back then. I think nowadays commentators do generally talk a lot more. But back in the day, commentators would leave big pauses, and the effect of it was actually pretty good. But you know, I as I say, I probably still talk too much, prattle on.
Would you do it all over again, like your career?
Yes, definitely. I got really lucky along the way, and I definitely would. I did a lot of radio, and I loved commentating on the radio because it's very different to television, where obviously everybody can see the pictures. On radio, you're painting the pictures for people. And I did quite a few games of Capital Radio in London, but also I moved to when Capital Radio took over BRMB in Birmingham. Ended up covering Aston Villa and Birmingham, Wolves and West Brom in the mid-90s. Great football patch, and Big Ron Atkinson and Barry Fry were the managers of Villa and Birmingham at the time, and honestly, two fantastic characters to deal with. There was never a dull moment. And then, like I say, started doing the Scottish football, which changed my life in many ways. And you know, started doing it in 1998 for Sky. Actually, had done a playoff game, Aberdeen Dunfermline, for Grampian TV 3 years before that. So yeah, I wouldn't change a bit. And I've always had sort of Scottish bosses along the way, funnily enough, even when I wasn't working in Scotland. So perhaps it was meant to be.
Must be. What's the best Old Firm game you've done?
Again, there's been many. The Cup final of 2002 I'd go back to, but also just to even it up with one each, I think the 6-2 game in 2000, Martin O'Neill's first Old Firm game, was one of the games that really blew me away as a commentator. Celtic were 3 up in 11 and a half minutes. Rangers got back to 3-1. Seem to recall they had a goal wrongly disallowed in that first half. It could have been 3-2 by half time, and who knows in the second half. Although I think Henrik Larsson, who you know, we were lucky enough to commentate for a long time on in Scotland, probably would have had the final say, and certainly did anyway with that wonderful chip in the game, which was just fantastic. And Rangers on the wrong end that day, but yeah, I would go back to the Cup final of 2002 as well, when they won it in injury time. And as I say, whenever I'm asked for my favourite Old Firm game, I make sure it's one each as to who wins it, just to sit on that fence.
Best Edinburgh Derby that you've done?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry about this, but Hearts fans, but obviously the 6-2 game, which funnily enough was a few months after the 6-2 game in Glasgow, that was an extraordinary experience where Mixu Patalainen scored a hat-trick, but doesn't really get remembered as much as Russell Latterby's great goal for Hibs that day. So that was an extraordinary match. And then when they met in the Cup final in 2012, and the boot was very much on the other foot, with Hearts comfortably winning, of course. So yet again, I'm going to go 1-1 in Edinburgh as well, just to keep safe.
Best tackle you've witnessed?
Best what, sorry?
Tackle.
Best tackle, blimey. That would be hard to remember as well. My memory when at this stage is not as good as it was, but I do love the guys who used to get stuck in. And yeah, there's been many of those over the year. Billy Bonds was one when I was growing up, and I used to love watching Roy Keane because he was a proper leader of his team, and yeah, sometimes a bit over the edge from him, but absolutely terrific player to watch and not bad to listen to now on Sky either.
Best semi-final you've witnessed?
Semi-final, crikey. I think Rangers Celtic in 2016 was pretty good when it went to penalties. In fact, was it that year where the and then it was a year before, or there was one year when we had about, I think there were 4-3 games in the semi-finals, and that was extraordinary as well. Can't quite remember the year again, but I love a semi-final because it essentially is so final for the losing team and the winning team, and the stakes are so high. I've been lucky enough to do many over the years, but in the playoffs in England, I did a semi-final between Sheffield United and Nottingham Forest once that was pretty extraordinary as well. I think it ended up 4-3 Sheffield United, and they got through to the final, and it went to extra time. There was just one of those games where absolutely everything happened. It was just extraordinary. So yeah, I've been very lucky.
Best anthem you've heard?
Best anthem. Well, when I hear Flower of Scotland, it's good when the Tartan Army are giving it full pelt. But I do like the French national anthem, the Marseillaise, as well. The Italian's pretty good. There's so many. And then you've got your actual club anthems as well. Sunshine on Leaf is got to be right up there, hasn't it, Darren? Come on, pretty good.
Can it be it? Does it become more easier the more times you do commentating?
Yes, I would say so, although you never stop learning. Sometimes I still watch the odd game back now and again and think, oh, I'm saying the same thing too often. And so you carry on learning. But yeah, certainly in the early days, I would watch. I don't like listening back to my own voice. But in the early days, you would, just to see where you were kind of going wrong and what you could do better. Whereas now, no, I feel pretty confident in what I'm doing, so I probably wouldn't listen back so much. As I say, I hate listening to myself anyway.
Now, once I end this, can I carry on talking to you?
Yeah, of course.
Right, so how many likes on this video?
How many what?
Likes.
How many likes on this video?
Yes.
How do you mean?
Like how many likes when I put it on YouTube?
Oh, right. Oh, I don't know. I've got so many podcast things to catch up on. I'm way behind, Darren, but hopefully we'll get a few.
But it's been an absolute pleasure to interview someone I didn't actually think I'd be able to interview. Not only that, but you follow me back on Twitter. It's absolutely mind-blowing. But thank you.
Anytime, and it's been a pleasure. You've been an inspiration to others yourself. I hope you remember that and realise it.
Thank you.